Recording is on.
Welcome, everyone. This is the third session of the Deeptails seminar. It's my pleasure today to introduce Francesc Moreno-Noguer and Enric from the Institute of Robotic Industrial from the Technical University in Barcelona. Francesc is a researcher there. He received a PhD in 2005, so he's a not so young researcher. And he has many contributions in computer vision with some, let's say, robotics flavor. He has received several awards, like an honorable mention award, best paper honorable mention award of YCB 2018, some best paper awards in workshops, in journals. And he's one of the supervisors of Enric, which is a PhD in the Technical University in Barcelona. From what I see, Enric will soon finish his PhD at some point. Not yet? No? Okay. It works differently. In France, after 3 years, you are out. So
4 years.
Okay. So lucky you still get a few more time. Anyway, so today they will present the details or the Deeptails behind their CVPR 2020 paper, which was entitled GanHand, Predicting Human Grasp Affordances in Multi-Object Scenes. So the floor is yours, and thanks again for accepting the invitation of the Deeptails.
All right. Let me see. Can you guys see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes, right?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Xavi, for inviting me here and reminding me that I'm not so young. But then I'm going to present this work, the Predicting Human Grasp Affordances in Multi-Object Scenes. That's a work that we presented at last CVPR. It was an oral paper, and we did in collaboration, of course. Enrique was the main author and who did most of the work. And then other collaborators like Albert Pumarola, Guillem Alanyà, and Gregory Roges from Nepal Labs. So what did we want to do in this work? So we wanted to model hand-objects interactions, right? That modeling hand-object interactions is essential for actually understanding the human behavior. So for a kid, the information that he or she gathers through interacting of the objects is really important for understanding himself or understanding what's going around. And if we could have this kind of technology, it has also many potentials. So we could think in doing some prosthetic designs. Also in human robotic interaction, it could be extremely useful. Imagine that you simply show to a robot how he needs to grasp a specific object in a human-like manner. So this could be readily done with this technology. And of course, also it will be essential for AR and VR applications. But while in robotics, there are a lot of works that try to infer the configuration of a gripper to grasp an object, there is not that many works that try to do this for the human hands. For the human hands, we find many different works that try to model different aspects of the hand, especially the geometry. All right, so we have several works here. I just mentioned one representative example, the paper of Kai et al. At YCB 2018, where what they do is from a single image, they estimate the pose of the hand, where the pose is represented by a 3D skeleton and they retrieve the position of each one of the joints of the hand. And they can do this in real time, in a very robust manner with cluttered backgrounds and etc. So more recently, there have been works also that also do amazing stuff on modeling not only the pose, but also the shape of the hand. So here we find this work of Smith et al. Seeger of 2020, where in real time and using multiple cameras, they are able to estimate the shape of each one of the hands, even in complicated configurations like those. And this paper at the bottom, that the CVPR 2020 of Kulun et al., so they are able, from a single image, to estimate the configuration, the 3D shape and pose of a hand, even in cluttered scenes and noisy images like those. So there are several papers doing this, and only a few papers that model hand-object interactions. We just found a couple of papers doing that. That's a paper at CVPR 19, where what they do is to simultaneously reason about the shape of the object and the shape of the hand. And they show that doing this joint reasoning, they can improve both types of reconstructions. And similar here for these robotics and application and automation letters at, in 2020. But in any case, in all these works, there is no previous work that tries to synthesize new human grasps. So if you observe these images, the hand is visible in the hand. So the actual task that they try to solve is just reconstruction. So in this paper, we tried to do to formulate a new problem. So the new problem was the following: given an image of one or several objects like those, okay, here I show you 4 examples of images. What we wanted to do is to predict how a human would grasp each one of the objects. And as a side effect or side result, we also had to do the 3D reconstruction and the understanding of the scene. As you can imagine, this is an extremely challenging problem. So we have only one input image, and from one input image, we need to retrieve the geometry of the object and hallucinate the hand configuration that's the grasping. And one of the problems that we find is that the mano, so the shape of the mano, we represent it through, the shape of the hand is represented through a model that's called the mano model, all right? This is 51 degrees of freedom, and that you can change the parameters of this 51 degrees of freedom, and you can have hands at different poses and shapes, all right? And here we just show different examples of changing the shape parameters or changing the pose parameters. But in any way, the problem is that we have to reason on a 51 dimensional space, which is a much higher dimensionality space than for robotic creepers, that it's usually 6-7 degrees of freedom. Another challenge that we had to handle is the fact that we wanted to deal with multi-object scenarios, which created and introduced exclusions, right? So these are the 2 main challenges that we need to handle, and we proposed 2 basic contributions. The first was the GanHand itself, which is a deep network that maps a single RGB image to a distribution of realistic grasps for all objects in the scene. And the second contribution is the YCB-Affordance dataset. So we created a dataset with more than 28 million realistic grasps, which annotated each one of the objects of a dataset that's called the YCB object dataset. So now I'm going to explain a little bit the high-level details of these 2 main contributions, all right? So first, the YCB-Affordance dataset. So this dataset that we created is based on a dataset that already existed. So this dataset is the YCB object dataset. This dataset has like 58 household objects of tools, cutlery, food, and for each one of the objects, we have also the 3D CAD model. So this dataset has been used before for benchmarking different robotics applications, but it was not annotated with human hand grasps. So we did this annotation. And how did we do it? So we manually annotated each one of the objects. And I don't know if you know this software, Graspit. Graspit is usually a software that is used in robotics to find automatically grasp for a specific object, but we used this software as just as interface. Basically, we manually, so for each one of the object, we manually configured each one of the position of the and pose of each one of the hands, and we put the hands different. We created different grasp for each one of the objects using this Graspit interface. But also what we did, it was that we didn't create these grasps randomly. So each one of the grasps belonged to one of the classes of a taxonomy. So this is a taxonomy. Some examples of this taxonomy that it was proposed by Feij et al. In 2015, that basically split how a human could grasp an object in 33 different classes. And here I show you some examples. So for instance, for handling this screwdriver, they use this hand configuration that's called medium grab. So this is a precision tripod configuration, etc. All right. So each one of the grasp that we notated belonged to one of these classes. So this graph here, what it shows is that by doing this notation manually, we could actually obtain grasp for each one of the classes. So in the x-axis, we show the different task class of grasps, all right? And in the vertical axis is the percentage of grasp that Graspit would be able to retrieve if we use it automatically. But since and you observe that only in 3 cases, Graspit could find the correct grasps. But since we annotated this manually, so we had grasp all along the taxonomy. So, all right, at this point, we already had all the objects annotated, and Rick will explain something how we did it. But then we had to transfer these grasps to real video sequences. We had 92 multi-object video sequences, all right, from this our YCB-Video dataset. And to transfer the grasp, what we did was first, for each frame of the YCB dataset, so we first annotated all potential grasps, and we only kept those which did not interpolate with other objects and the ground plane. And by doing this for all the objects, all the frames, all the videos, we end up with these numbers of the YCB-Affordance dataset. So the dataset has 100,000 more than images, 21 household objects, and we have like 6 grasps per object among the 33 grasp taxonomy. And at the end, we have 28 million grasps. All right. So with these numbers, then we can already think in building a network, a deep learning network, and train it. So, but first, let me show you some examples of this annotation. So this is the precision grasp, the power grasp. So that's the initial annotation that we did for each one of the objects. All right. So recall that we did this manually. So by manually finding the best positioning the hand in the best configuration, and this transfer to the real objects was done automatic. All right. So here we show just 3-4 frames and different grasp for each one of the objects of the scene. All right. So now let me show you the network that we created. So remind the problem. Given an input image, we want an architecture that estimates the 3D geometry of the object plus the hand configuration. All right. So we created this network, which at the first sight, it might look a bit cumbersome, but if we analyze it slowly, you'll see that it makes sense. So in the top part, we have this module here that is in charge of estimating the object pose or the 3D reconstruction of the object. So for this, we used pre-trained off-the-shelf networks. For instance, for multi-object scenes, we assumed that the geometry of the objects was known, and we only estimated the 3D pose, and we used this specific algorithm. When dealing with a single with the scenes with single objects, we used AtlasNet, which estimated both the pose and the 3D shape of the object. And in any case, when we have the pose and 3D shape, what we do is to create this binary mask. So we predict the object on top of the input image. All right. And we fit this to the second branch of the network. So this is the coarse grasp estimation. So what we do here is, given the input image and the binary mask of the object, so what we do is to first predict which is the best grasp type to grasp this object. So instead of trying to retrieve directly the grasp configuration, what we do is first a classification task, where we predict first the grasp type. Given this grasp type, then we do a coarse estimation of the hand parameters using the Mano model. But this is very coarse, so the hand usually ends up quite far from the object, so there is no contact with the object, and this needs to be refined. And the refinement is done by a third module that just tries to find a close contact of the hand with the object. And in the next slide, I'll show you some of the losses that we used for this refinement. Well, first, the classification loss. This is for the initial module. So we have a classification loss of the predicted grasp type. And then we have several losses, geometric losses, that try to refine the hand, the configuration of the hand in order to touch the object. So first, we have a loss that optimizes the finger position. And what it tries to do is to minimize the arc distance between each one of the joints of the finger and the surface of the object, all right? I think Enric will also explain more details on this loss. We have another loss, which is a prior on the contact points. So we assume that the person or the hand or the most likely regions of the hand that will be in contact with the object are the fingertips and the palm of the hand. And also in the law, we create a loss that tries to minimize the distance between the object and these regions of the hand, all right? Then we have also a loss that tries to minimize the hand-object interpretation. You can see here that at the very beginning, just using the classification loss, we would obtain this kind of interpretation, but to avoid this, we added a loss interpretation error, all right? Then also, similarly, we have a loss that tries to minimize the ground hand interpretation. And finally, one very important loss is a adversarial loss that favors physically plausible hand configuration. So here you can see that if we don't use these laws, we could end up with hands which are non-anthropomorphic. So I will just skip this slide, the blushing static, because Enrique will explain details on this, and I'll jump directly to the results. All right. So what you'll see in each one of the results is the object here. All right. And the initial estimation of the hand configuration, and then how this hand is refined in order to perform a fine grasp. So if I play the video, you'll see this. So you see how the hand is refined. All right. So in this case, for instance, you see that after the initial rough estimation of the hand, there is a large interpretation. But when running the optimization, we correct this. All right, here, even the interpretation is more clear and it's corrected. And I'll show now some results on a few frames, real frames. All right, so you can see how we can grasp each one of the objects. So all the grasps are more or less plausible. All right, so here there is something, for instance, when grasping this power grill, we don't grasp from the handle. So that's because we didn't use the affordance information of the object. So that's something that we could easily do. If we know that that the power grill needs to be grabbed from the handle, we could also add this loss in our network, but we didn't use this kind of object affordance information. That's something that it can be easily done. And That's all I wanted to explain, just to give a very high-level presentation of the paper. So just to recall that we presented the first approach for synthesizing human grasps, and we released the YCB-Affordance dataset, which is a large-scale dataset with more than 28 million grasps annotated on real video sequences. And we designed GanHand to map object images to human grasps. And some interesting features and characteristics of the GanHand are that it uses a classification plus regression strategy, and that we combine different geometric losses. And as a future work, what we wanted to do is, as I said, to combine this with object affordance information, such that we can grasp the objects from the correct parts. And also what we want to do is to apply GanHand to robotic multi-finger grippers. So robotic manipulation is typically done with parallel jaw grippers with a very low number of degrees of freedom, but we created also multi-finger that generates multi-finger grasp on a barrett hand. So that's a work that we've been in collaboration with people from Aalto University in Finland. All right, and you see here, so given an input image, we created this multi-finger, which is essentially very similar to GanHand, and we predict multiple robotic grasps which are feasible, and then we execute the one which has the best score. All right, and that's all I wanted to explain. Now let's jump to Enric. So let me stop sharing this.
Okay, so I think I'm sharing right now. So you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, my name is Enric, and I will be presenting the second part of the Deeptails seminar. And basically, we have, as Francesc mentioned, two main contributions on this work. One of them is the dataset, YCB-Affordance, where we annotate this kind of grasps on multiple objects. And the other one is the GanHunt model, which I will explain later. So I will now start, well, actually, with a bit of a fast recap of what our goal is. So the idea of what we want to take as input is images like this, basically with multiple objects, and if possible, that look real with real challenges like occlusions and multiple poses of the objects. So for this, we took advantage of this YCB-Video dataset, which contains images like this, and also the accurate pose registrations for all the objects. So we downloaded these models, the CAD models of all these benchmark, and use Graspit simulator that I'm going to show right now, and use the manual integration from it. So we took that also from this paper from Hasson at CVPR. And basically, we use this interface for annotation, right? So basically, Graspit in the simulator is the interface on the left. It basically can load objects, object models like these ones, and also models of hands that can be human hands, or this is actually the one that Francesc mentioned in the last couple of slides. And this is how we would annotate grasps manually for this kind of grasp. So the idea is that we can put and rotate the fingers and the whole hand or gripper, and then we use the terminal on the right to control the Graspit interface to save the poses and the translation rotations, and also the grasp type according to the taxonomy that we used to identify this kind of grasps. So this is manual, so it took some time to annotate these grasps, and we spent about 2 or 3 days to annotate a bit less than 400 grasps. This is good because these kind of grasps are realistic, and they follow distribution of realistic grasps within this taxonomy. But the problem is that it's not nearly enough to train some kind of network. So we had to increase this number of grasps, right? What we tried to do is take advantage of these geometry properties. For instance, symmetry is one property that I think can be very useful in many projects that tackle 3D shapes, especially those shapes that are simple like glasses or cubes. So for these 58 objects, we annotated the order of symmetry on every principal axis of the object. Basically, order of symmetry means that a cube like this can be rotated 4 times on this red axis, and then the shape will repeat. So basically, we can repeat also the graph that we have annotated every 90 degrees, and they will be valid. So within this approach, we multiply the number of grasps to around 5,000. And then, like Francesc mentioned, we move to the YCB-Video dataset with images like this. We use the ground truth 60 pose of the objects to transfer the grasps directly. And then we wanted to remove those hands that are not feasible in reality. So we first annotated the equation of the planes, assuming that the tables were just planes, and we did that by annotating some pixels that belong to the plane, and we used then the depth image to recover the point cloud and fit a plane on those points. So with that, we were able to remove the grasp that would go from below the object, so they would be invalid, and also the grasp that intersect with other objects, like these ones. So with this 28 million grasps, it was a kind of enough on 100,000 images to train this network. And we proposed GanHunt, which is essentially a number of combination of these blocks that we try to simplify and train separately some of them. So I will try and divide all these the tricks that we used for the model in different parts. So for instance, as Francesc mentioned, we were using we had a branch to understand the 3D layout of this scene, either with using object reconstruction or pose estimation. And for object reconstruction, we were using AtlasNet, which the idea of AtlasNet basically it's deforming a 3D sphere so that it resembles the object that it's seeing. The main problem we had is that we were dealing with objects from ShapeNet, and we had shapes from every different type with different scales and translation offsets. So it was really difficult to understand that only from RGB, and it didn't really train at all from the beginning. So we had to do this scale normalization and translation normalization, which is common if we only have an RGB, because we cannot rely on any prior to understand the scale, for instance, of the object. Then our intuition basically also said that we could use only and rely only on chamfer distance to train this. But if we only use chamfer distance, then the predicted or the deformed sphere look quite weird with duplicated faces also. So it's relatively common in this kind of works to regularize this mesh in some ways. Edge length tries, for instance, to get the average length of the edges of the whole mesh and penalize the difference between the predicted edges and that average. So that already helps to keep more or less the size of the faces constant. And then we also added this smoothness loss, which penalizes difference between normals, changes in normal directions of consecutive vertices. So all these two regularization terms help a lot in these two cases. And so this was for object reconstruction. And for the task of pose estimation, we try to keep it simple, and we used a pre-trained network from this paper, which was quite well already pre-trained on this data set. Also, we had a number of loss functions. So some of them were tricky, and for instance, calculating the interpenetration between two meshes can be a bit tricky. So there are a couple of ways to do this, but what worked best for us and fast was to do it in this way. So we first converted the objects to watertight, and when the objects were watertight, we could trace a ray from some point outside the object to a certain vertex of the hand, and we want to know if this vertex is inside or outside this target mesh. By counting the number of intersections of this ray only from the origin to this point, we were able to know whether this point is inside or outside. So basically, if it's an odd number of intersections, like here it's only one, the vertex would be inside the mesh. So for all those vertices of the hand that were inside the mesh, we had this loss function of penalizing the distance to the object surface. Another metric that we used for analyzing how well the model was doing was this simulation where the hand in blue is kept fixed and the object is subjected to gravity and other forces. So the less displacement it has, the object, the more stable the grasp is, right? So that also gives this intuition of that the finger is touching the object really close. That's both qualitatively and quantitatively good. So that's why we did this finger refinement that Francesc mentioned. And basically, this consists of, for every degree of freedom of a finger, we try to put it very, very close to the surface of the object. So we did that by predefining the range of rotation that a finger has. For instance, this finger can move from this pose until this rotation. And within those limits, we discretized very densely the number of rotations that the finger had and into k rotations. And for each of those rotations, we obtained the distance matrix from the finger vertices to the object vertices. We use those distance matrix to obtain the first angle in which the finger already was touching the object. So this is a process that we were repeating for every degree of freedom and every finger. So following the kinematic chain of the human hand. And we performed a small evolution study of whether this was important quantitatively. So the black point represents a model that does not do this post-processing. And the red line is a model that where we run this post-processing only for the first joint of each finger. So when doing this, we already decrease both the simulation displacement of this simulation that I was showing before, or also the interpenetration between these 3D meshes. It also increases a bit more if we run this optimization for 2 or 3 degrees of freedom per finger. So we perform also an evaluation study of all the losses that we had. Since we are training with 6 losses, and this is quite a bit. So as Francesc was mentioning, also the adversarial loss, we tried to train without it, and then training become much easier, and the network converts faster. But the main problem is that even though we only predict 51 degrees of freedom for representing this hand mesh, this is still an overparameterization, and the fingers rotate over themselves, and they get poses that are not non-anthropomorphic and non-realistic. So basically, the discriminator learns to, helps the generator to learn this space of real poses. Then if we train without contact loss, then basically the model doesn't have any incentive to place the hands closer to the model. And the trade-off between interpenetration and contact means that if we train without interpenetration, then the model will predict hands that are very close to the object and they will have contact, but they will also have interpenetration, like in this case, right? So basically, the final model, GanHand, is trying to measure this trade-off, and we try in it to have both contacts and reduce the interpenetration as possible. So for the task of inference, this model is a bit different to some other models for inference, for instance, like 3D pose estimation, because it's a stochastic, it's a generative model, and every forward pass we get a different result. So basically what we did was to discretize the rotation space, and for each rotation we take as input and run a forward pass to predict basically a grasp from every rotation. So we get a number of predictions, and for those predictions that look bad, like in this case, because we get intersection, we discard those proposals, and from those that are still good, we select only one according to the best grasp score. So also we performed an ablation study of the best grasp score that we can get, depending on the time we are willing to wait. So the main baseline is grasped, which is this simulator that I was showing before, and predicts on average grasps with 0.4 or 0.5 grasp score. So this metric actually has this range from 0 to 1 only. And we can beat basically grasp bits if we sample 3 discretizations or more. And that takes less than a second, while grasp bit takes usually 5 minutes. And we can get better grasp scores if we wait a bit more, like up to 2 seconds. Okay, and finally, some maybe conclusions that I thought were useful and we learned from this project, more in the low level than the ones Francesc mentioned. So while the one in the high level is, I think that it's important to consider whether the project that you're working on is trying to propose a new problem or is working on an existing problem. So in this case, we were tackling a new problem, and I found it was very different from working on an existing problem. So for an existing problem, one can use datasets that already exist and tools and evaluation metrics that exist. But it's in some cases very, very hard to improve on the state of the art. So that's challenging. And on new problems, one don't really need to compare much with the other papers, but usually one has to create their own data set or come up with some unsupervised way to learn. And I think that's important to think in the beginning of a project what experiments one should do. Then more on the low level, it was useful for us to try and see what other data sets we could use and take advantage of to try and annotate the minimum grasps, the better. And in general, I think it's important to think about geometry and augmentation properties. Regarding the model, it was also useful for us to first do this classification step where we predict grasp type. And so we only have to refine as a second step the pose of the hand, so that one can also train this model separately, and it helped in converging quite a bit. And so that's going also with this point of simplifying these networks as much as possible, training them separately. And for instance, it was useful for us having relative position instead of predicting absolute position. And finally, also like the same point, even you're tackling a new problem, I think it's important to think about how it can scale to on the widely scenarios and how can one generate results on real images, because basically that's what reviewers will be looking for. And well, that's it. You will find our code and dataset on these 2 GitHub links. And thank you.
Thank you very much for this very nice presentation, Francesc and Enric. I will stop the recording now.